Welcome back. In this session, we'll be picking up from where we were before, where we've started to map our flat file to the X12 format. Today's session will be focusing on completing that and doing the more tricky elements around the HL section. Once we've done that, we'll have a complete mapping and you'll have a full understanding of how to map to X12. So let's jump in and carry on. In our previous session, we went through and mapped our CSV file to an 856 X12. We went all the way through the mapping process and created a hierarchy level entry there related to the shipment itself. We then went through and added all the name and addresses. So we've basically now got an ASN where we've got the references, we've got a shipment entry in there, and that part is now complete. In this session, what we want to do is expand this so that we're now then able to map the elements related to the orders, the pallets, the cartons, and our line items. So in order to do this, what I want to do is create a separate mapping that we're going to use in order to basically cut out and paste it within this particular map. The reason I tend to do this is if you've got complex elements, and this is definitely a complex element, we're able to test it in isolation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create or take a copy of our input and our text file here, and I'm basically going to paste it into a new map. And again, all I'm doing this for is for testing purposes. Hi everyone, I'm always looking to produce more content for this channel. So can I ask you a favour? If you enjoy the content I produce, could you kindly subscribe? This will help my channel beat the YouTube algorithm and gain more exposure and opportunities to generate further content. Thank you. So what do we want to be able to achieve here? Well, looking at our data, what we want to be able to do is create HL records for our orders and our containers. And these need to be able to run sequentially. And what I mean by that is if I bring over here, we've got our HL here that's static, so we can kind of take that out of the equation. What we then want to be able to do is we want to be able to literally take every single line that we're interested in and assign it a unique number. In essence, almost like a position. And we can use the position function within MapForce in order to achieve this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, that's fine. But then every line also needs to be aware of its parent HL number. And then really for pallets, we probably on top of this want also a count of the children. So that we know that when we get to this HL and we create this HL, we can say that it's 3, it belongs to 2, so this order, and it contains, for instance, in this case, it would be 2 cartons. And we can start doing things within the map that we've previously generated in order to do that. So we need one format that's basically going to encapsulate each one of these types of records. So what I've done is I've created a bit of an XML schema in order to represent this. And then what we want to be able to do is actually map to this particular schema. And then we can then use that in our base mapping here in order to map that particular HL reference data through. So where are we going to start? Well, firstly, let's have a look at our schemas. So when we're talking about the schema here, we're talking about what we want to be able to do in order to get this data looking how we need to look. So if I bring this over here, what we kind of want to be able to do is we want to be able to represent our pallets, cartons, and our orders in a nodal way. So what we want to be able to do is eventually we want to be able to populate a schema like this I've just generated in order to put our ASN, the PO reference, and the HL for that order. So in this case, that would then be our number 2 here. We then would want underneath that all the pallets for that particular order. So that would be here and here, because it references two. And then within underneath those, the cartons. And then each one would have whatever HL reference it currently has. And then what we would then be able to do is once this is populated, we would then be able to bring over this schema, which is basically kind of a flattened version, where every single line item, we can then map our orders into lines. We can then repeat this and map our pallets into lines and our cartons into lines. And because we'll be doing the cartons here, we'd be able to quite quickly get access for the carton, its parent HL reference. And then if I'm at pallets and I was going to map my pallets across, I would be able to not only get the pallet HL reference, which is automatically mapped nicely there, I'd be able to also get the count of the number of cartons, and I'd also be able to get reference to the parent HL reference. So this is what we're going to do during this session so that we can end up with a schema at the end that very much looks quite similar to this, but we've got all of the information here and we can then start populating our X12 856. So where are we going to start with this? Well, firstly, we need to start pulling the records out so that we have orders, so we have our pallets, and so we then have our cartons. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to insert a variable in using the XML schemas, and then I'm going to choose our schema for our HL piece here. So we're going to do this one here. And I'm going to start pulling that information through. So here what I want, this is going to be our final piece when we get there, but we're going to populate this early. And on here, I'm going to create a filter. And on that filter, I'm using a value map and I'm saying whether it's an order or a container, I want it to grab that particular information. So I'm going to pull this through here. I'm going to map this to HL. And then I'm going to check that field. Now you might be wondering, hang on a minute, Luke, you just said that you want orders and then you're going to do pallets and then you're going to do cartons. So why the heck are you trying to take both at the same time? And that's a really good question. I want to acknowledge those rows because if I don't and I just say give me the orders, there's two records. So the position's going to be 1 and then 2. That's not correct. Because if we bring over our data here, I want the second order to be position 8. So I need to consider all of the various data elements here. So if we look at the raw data, I want orders and all the cons, and all the orders and all the cons, the containers, so that I can get the correct position. So now I've got that through, I can then start mapping these fields across. So in this case, we're going to take the type. So I can map that across. The reference, and we know all of these are in order because we've created this schema manually. And again, all I did was create XML to represent this and then drop this into MapForce in order to get it to generate an XML schema. And here the name, I've kind of overloaded the name. So obviously if we're talking about orders, this field will contain the PO. If we're talking about containers, it will contain the container ref. And if it was lines, I think it's the PO line number. I don't think we're using that here in this instance, but I've just generated that anyway. So we can now go ahead and map this across very simply. And there we go. We've got a field 13. What is in field 13? Oh, there's nothing there anyway at the moment. I do not believe. No, okay, it's just blank, so that's fine. We don't need to map that across. So we've now got that. So that's great. So we've now got our rows of orders and technically containers. Then what I want to do is I want to insert here, and this is where we're going to start actually populating the structure that we want in order to represent our orders and then our pallets and our containers. So we're just going to expand all of this out just so you can see this. and we can start populating this. So at this particular point, we just want to populate the orders information. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm just grabbing this off the other screen because I don't want to keep drawing this from fresh each time because it's going to be time consuming. But I want to explain what we're doing here. So I've got a filter. So I'm going to filter here. I'm only getting it where the type is order. And then what I'm going to do is I'm then going to map the ASM reference to the ASM reference. And obviously each order is going to go across. And then I'm also going to pull over the PO reference. And there we go, we get that. Now, because we've pulled over in here, we've got both all the containers and all the orders. We can then take the position here, map this on here, and we know that that's going to be okay. Now, I can check this by literally dragging the schema on the screen and dropping it back in. So if I grab my XML lookup schema, because at the moment it's a variable, so it's not going to print anything on screen. And then if I literally just map this straight across and then go output, you can see here we've got HL1 and HL7. Now, although technically that's not quite what we want, that is correct. We're going to add one to these later on in the map. We just want to make sure that we've got the right sort of positions here. So, all right, technically speaking, this is what we're actually trying to achieve. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And we can change all this later. And then these are going to be reduced. So that's going to then be 8. That's going to relate to 7. This is going to relate to 1. So that's correct on there. Yep. So again, this is then going to be 5, 1, 2, 2, 1. So we've got an order with a reference of 1, and then we've got a pallet that relates to that order. These cartons then link to pallet 2. We then have this third pallet, and then this contains 1 carton, and so forth. So that's what we're going to do. So this is now working correctly on screen here. Let me zoom that in. We can see that that is valid. So let's just save that there. Now you can see we've got the orders. What we now need to do is we need to basically repeat this and map the pallets and the cartons. Now I need to make it clear in doing this, there's not going to be any correct order. We're just chucking all the pallets under the order, all of the cartons under a pallet, and I don't care the order because later on we're going to filter this and get this in order. This is purely around populating this structure. So we've got orders at order level, pallets at pallet level, and cartons at carton level. And that's what we're going to do. And we're going to duplicate this below. And then we can use some filtering in order to then combine 3 of these into a single one, which has them in the right order. So let's go ahead and do that now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab on screen and chuck in the one for the pallets. So here, what I'm doing is I'm filtering again on order and com. And the reason, just to be clear why I'm doing this and I'm not doing it multiple times within here, is because this file is flat. There is no way. It's like trying to reference information after doing a group by. You can't group the number of employees by department and then start cherry picking that out. It works a little bit like SQL in that way. So what I have to do is I duplicate all of this. They become independent on their own. And that's how we're going to get around that particular issue. And again, I've pulled this from a map I've already pre-done, and I'm showing you the process so that we don't spend hours just dragging and linking things up for the sake of it. So again, here I'm taking the value from here. We're going to take the row, so we're doing the same process as we did before. In fact, I'm going to cheat slightly and drag this on here and then go replace connection. Oh, is that not going to do it? Normally, let me just delete this. Let's see. This should, in theory, populate all of it. There we go. I need to hold Control so that we duplicate and we don't move the ones that are already from here. Include descendants. There we go. And then we can delete this one out and then put that there. Again, cheating a little bit. From experience in MapForce, I know different ways to try and speed up some of this process. So again, we've got this going through here. So what are we doing here? Well, we're populating the same data. Here is the same as there. The difference here is we're actually concatenating the type and the container type. So what we're doing is we're concatenating the type, so this field 1, with field 4. So, and then what we're doing is we're checking for conpls. So again, we want to maintain all of the data at this point that we're picking up here because we want the correct position. And then all I'm doing is mapping these to pallets, and I've gone through and mapped the whole piece, and in the same as above, I've then got the position. Now what that means is when I then come through, I can then start mapping that, and we can see how that will work. So if I grab this schema here, we're going to duplicate it again, just so you can see how this is working. We're then going to extend this out. We're then going to grab palette, put that there, and then we've got multiple outputs, so we put the eye on this, have a look at this, and now we can see that we know we've got 3 pallets, and we've got a pallet here with a HL of 2, one here of 5, one here of 8. So if we bring our data back on screen, we've got a pallet here of 2, a pallet here of 2, a pallet here of 5, and a pallet here of 8. So the position process is working because we're maintaining all of those elements before we then kind of filter those particular ones out. So that's worked really well there. So we've got that. What we now need to do is, again, the same process, but instead of looking for conpal, we want to look for concart so that we get our cartons. So again, slightly cheating here, but we're going to bring this over. I'm then going to zoom this out. And then paste this on screen. And again, we can follow that same kind of process. So if I grab all of these. Grab that there we go. Bring this over. And I'm going to do the same process. So I'm grabbing this again, just to show you. This is still orders and cons. So it's all the same. And then I'm going to delete this out. And again, just to speed things up, if I map this across to here, it's going to bring all of that across. And then I can just overwrite that header loop there. And we've got that process there. Okay, and then all we've done is the same thing. So concart, position, and we've mapped that to cartons. And again, just to show you that this is working. And this is the best way of working with MapForce. You can start, because we've done this as a separate map, we've got to worry about the impact of the other data. We can fully focus on the area that we're trying to, or the elements that we're trying to do and achieve here. So then bring this across, hit OK, hit spy on that, and then we can have a look. Let me have a look on here. And go back on here. Where's the error? Target has one or more unconnected mandatory points filter. I've missed a filter somewhere. Oh, yeah. There we go. Okay. Just save that. And then we go output. And there we've got our cartons. Again, we're not dealing with the whole structure at the moment, but we've now got our cartons. We know that we've got a carton on HL3, one on 4, one on 6, and one on 9. And all of this information looks to be valid and correct. Perfect. So we now have 3 separate entities. One that contains orders, one that contains pallets, and one that contains cartons. Now what we need to do is link all 3 of these together to create a single structure which contains an order with the correct and only the correct pallets underneath it that belong to that order. And then underneath that, the cartons that only belong to that pallet. So we can delete these out. We're just using this to view the output. And then we can start building that part of the solution together in order to start mapping it and getting our resulting input back as to how we want it. So if we go here, or output, sorry, not input, we can hit save, just make sure that we've got that there. We've got an error because we're not mapping anything out, which is correct. Now let's start putting this together. as we're going to be mapping these elements all together, let's try and make these as simple as possible. So I'm going to make these smaller, and then it will enable us to bring these up further, which will just make it a little bit easier for drag and dropping the mapping data. So let's bring this up, pop that up here. I think that's probably all right. And then we've got cartons. We have to have that all extended because they're all child elements. Bring this here and then bring this up. Let's just stick that there for a minute. Okay. So what we need to do now is we need to drop on a schema related to the lookup schema, which is this one here that I've just hit skip. So there we go. So we can start constructing this in a way that will link up all of these records. Let's do that. Here we go. So if we can link this up to an output file, we'll be able to actually see what that's generating before we do anything else. So what we first want to be able to do is we want to be able to link the orders through at the header level. So we can link those orders. So for every order, we want to create an order and link that up. Right, we can leave this element here. Can we delete that out? There we go. So what we've got now is our orders. So if I hit save and we hit output, we've got our orders. Perfect. Now we want to be able to link to our palettes and just provide the palettes that link directly to that particular entity on there. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'll put on screen, let's go equal. We've got an ASM reference, we've got a PO, we've got the HL reference here. So how are we going to match up the palettes that belong to this particular order? Well, we can do that based on the PO number. So we can go, we want the palettes where we have a PO number from the order which matches the PO number on the palette. Because we go back to our file format here, we can see that our containers for palettes contain our PO number. So we've got that linking reference. And if that is equal, then what we can do is we can insert an if else. So if that is equal, we can then start mapping the various elements across. So let me move that down, zoom that in. So we can then go, well, actually, if that's the case, then we want the ASM reference, and we're going to map the ASM reference, our palette level here. And we're going to get a warning because we also need to map in our palette for the record here. So we can just use that. It's always going to have an ASM record. So we're going to create our palette reference there. And then what we need to basically do is go through here, and we can use the same Boolean and basically grab all of the information we need for each of the fields. So things like the container reference, container type, and so forth. So we can map all of the information here to the right hand side. So if I go to output now, we can start seeing that we've got a single order here, which contains 2 palettes, and then our second order here, which contains 1. So this is all working really nicely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to create all of these and map those across because it's quite straightforward and you can see what I've done there, and then we'll come back. So you can now see I've added all of those elements on and they're all being mapped over to the palette side. So if we now go to output, we get all of the palette information here. We know this is all correct. Kilos, centimeters, PO reference here relates to the parent. And then again, the PO reference here relates to the parent. So here we are now looking very good. What we now need to then do is the same for the cartons. So here what we need to do is we now need to pick out the cartons that belong to the palettes. And a little bit like we've linked these two and filtered them, we want to link these two together. And the way we do that is having a look at our data and seeing what the relationship is between a carton and a pallet? Well, we know that field 5 here, we've got the pallet reference that carton belongs to. So again, like we've got the PO at line level, so we've got the PO here that references the PO at header level. At line level here, we've got the parent container. So this is going to contain the pallet reference. So in the same way, we can now basically do the same thing where we check if it's equal and do that whole process. So I'm just going to grab this, move it here. In fact, to make things a little bit easier, just going to throw this further up the screen. Let's show that there for the minute. There we go. And that gives us a little bit more screen space for us to then deal with this. So what we're saying is where the parent container here is going to equal the container reference, which is the pallet. So this is where the carton is within that, or references that pallet. Then we can then start grabbing that information. Oh, hang on a minute. Wrong one. Parent container. Because it's a carton we're after. And then from here, we can just grab that ASN reference and then go through and map that to both carton and the ASN reference. And again, I can do the same thing here. So if I just place this down here, so then we're going to have, that was the ASN reference. We're then going to have the container reference. And I'll pop the rest of that on, the container type. And then we can use the same Boolean. And then we're linking this to the container reference and the container type. And again, in a minute, I'll do the rest of it. What I want to do right now is hit save and then go to output and just make sure this is working. So under pallet 1, we've now got carton 1 and 2. Under pallet 2, we've got carton 3. And under pallet 3, we've got carton 4. So this, again, all is working exactly as we need. Because again, our end game is to get this hierarchy populated. So then we can use this to map back to our adjusted HL lines where we've got our parent, the HL number, and the child count. So what I'm going to do now is, again, like I did before, I'm just going to populate by mapping all of these, copying if and else's down, mapping those through, and populating the rest of the cartons. So I've now populated our cartons. So if we now look at this, we've got it fully populated. And if I go to output, we can see we've got all of the carton information there, as well as the pallet information and the order information. So we've now got a fully populated hierarchy. What we then need to be able to do is take that hierarchy and actually start populating the data in order to populate our HL schema here. So what I'm going to do in this instance, I'm going to replace this with a variable because, again, we're only using that output just so that we can see what we're dealing with. So our lookup schema, we're just going to go insert a variable, choose a structure. Actually, I don't even need to do that. We've got it already here. We can just copy that. So let's grab, I'm just going to move this over here. And I'm going to grab that, include all of those, and there we go. So we've now got our full structure here. Just going to expand it all out. And that's now fully populated. So what we want to be able to do now is we want to be able to take one of our HLs. So I'm just copying this again, saves inserting it. We can just quite quickly do that. And then I want to start populating this with the details that we need. And what is that? Well, firstly, we want to be able to populate orders. So we are going to paste in here our order type, but we're just going to grab our orders. So for every order, we're then going to have an ASM reference, a PO, and the HL reference there. So that's going to be fairly straightforward. And we can also add our count. So we've got a count of child items. So we've got our parents context here. We've then got our palette nodes, and then here we can then loop this to actually go child count so that we know how many palettes we've got as part of that order. That's the parent node we can just leave. We know it's an order, so we can probably fix that elsewhere. We don't really necessarily need to do anything else with that. Now here we could right click and go add duplicate after. So that's our orders. We then want to take our palettes. So again, we're going to take our palette. We're going to come through and map that on here. It's going to intelligently try and map because it's matched on names for some of those. And this one we know is a con because that's the type of field. Again, we are trying to just create the same sort of structure that we've got on our original file here. So palettes and cartons in this case are called cons. So yep, that's fine. It's not really a problem. We're going to set that all up. We then can take our container reference. So our container reference then goes there. Our container type, parent container, length. And again, we're just going through the process of mapping this through. So all the complexities on the left-hand side here. The rest of this is going to be really, really, really simple. So we then have the PO reference. The HL reference comes through. Now we've got because we're looking at palettes, we've got a parent. We can then take the parent HL, and we can also then do a count. So what we're going to do is we're going to say for each palette, we want to know the count of cartons, and that will enable us to use that later on when we're mapping it to the X12 format. Perfect. Now what we want to do, again, is duplicate after. Expand this out. And then we can start doing our cartons. So again, for every carton, we're going to bring this over. That's also going to be a con. That's fine on there. It's fixed value. And then we've got ASM reference, container reference, container type, parent container, length, width, height. All of that goes through. The PO comes through. HL's there. Parent HL will be the parent HL which belongs to the palette. And then child will leave blank because there isn't going to be any child for the carton in this instance. So this now gets us this data. And then what I want to do is I want to grab and show you what that's actually done. So you can start seeing and understanding why we're going through this particular process and the different steps. Again, there may well be ways of doing this in a much easier, more simplistic, less steps kind of way. I'm focusing on doing it this way because I feel like this will give you a good representation of what I'm trying to achieve here and the various steps. So I've mapped this across. If I go to output, we can then see that we've got our ord. Again, because it's a schema that isn't really multi-nodal, we've kind of done it like a CSV. It's a little bit harder to follow, but we've got here HL1, but then we've got order type HL7. Now, when we link this up with our X12, we actually want these ordered based on their HL references. We don't want ord, palette, 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 container, 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 or carton, carton, carton. So what we actually need to do is we need to resort this. So what we need to do is we need to resort that based on the HL here. So if we insert a sort, what we can then do is we can go sort these nodes, so the HLs, each record based on the HL, so the count, and then we can map this through on here. Hit replace, and unfortunately we have to go through and map each one of these independently because MapForce likes breaking connections like that. No, I've done that wrong. Here we go. Replace. Helpful didn't hit the down key then. Right, so there we go. So we're literally just mapping each one of these across. But it's going to apply that sort, which should then result in the same data, but it's going to be ordered how we want which is, in our case, it will be order 1, pallet 1, then carton, carton, pallet 2, carton, second order, then you've got the pallet and the carton for that. So if we go to our output now, we can see we've got HL. If I highlight HL, HL 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's all in the correct order. So that's now actually working. This is basically, and again, if I zoom out, it is quite complex. There's quite a lot of data here. But we have now managed to get an entity which is going to represent our HLs. So what we can do now is we can grab a HL, grab that, paste that on screen. So now we know that's valid, we can map this to a variable. And then we're in a position, because we don't want an output file in the middle of our map when we drag this over into our other map, we can now take this and basically paste this within our X12 map. So let's look at doing that now then. Now the easiest way of moving this into our map is literally to take all of the elements here. We're going to copy them, and then we're going to go to our map and just zoom out. And what we're going to do is we're going to stick this down the bottom somewhere, and we can look at moving this about. We can look at moving this well out of the way, but so that we can align it for our second or our later NLs, not NLs, sorry, HLs, so we can actually start utilizing this. Now we can see this has gone all the way over here. Now what we want to do is we want to link all of this back up to our element up here. So the best way of doing this, I have found, is if we grab this particular element on its own and throw it up to the top. What we can then do is start unhooking this side and mapping it here. And if we do that, then everything else that we've done so far in our previous session will all be good. So if I start, I might have to zoom in to do this. There we go. Put that on here. Include descendant connections, include all connections. There we go. So that's moved a huge chunk of those over. Right, now we can delete this, and we can also go down here and we can delete this input because we don't need that now. So there we go. So we've got all of this here. We would potentially want to be able to put this inside a maybe its own procedure or something there, its own function. But for the moment, we just want to be able to move this so that we've got this available. Here we've got it. And then we can start mapping the right-hand side here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move this way, just so it's a bit closer. It makes it a little bit easier for us to then map. Okay, so we're now going to then look at creating our subsequent HLs. So if I go through here and we have a look at what we've got at the moment, scroll up, we've got a loop HL here. We want to duplicate this after, and it's here where we're going to start setting up our HLs for all of the contents that are part of this ASN. So in order to start mapping this through, what we want to do is expand the HL element here, and then start mapping through. So for every HL, we're going to create a new HL record. We're then going to need to map the hierarchical level. And then we need the HL number. So that would actually be this reference here. Then from this, what we want to then do is we want to map to the parent. Now, this would be this one here. But also, we've got to bear in mind, this HL here was the record number. So we've got to realize here we need to add 1 to this because it was a line count. And obviously we've already created our first line. If we go to output here, we've got our HL reference here, which is 1. We don't want to start 1 here. We want 2 onwards. So what we need to then do is we need to add an add and then like an add 1. So if we pop that in here, we want to add 1 to this value, and then we can map this through. So that gives us, if we go to our output now, the correct HL numbers. Ignore all the errors here. We're not populating lots of mandatory data at the moment, but we'll get to that in a second. So that's our hierarchical number. We then need to set up what the parent would be. So on this, we know what the parent is going to be, but as well as that, we need to add 1 to it, and for where the type is order, ORD, we're just going to set it to 1 because we've already got that parent referenced further up. So what we've got is we've got a value map here that says if it's order or ord, then it's true. Then we're going to set that value for the parent to 1. Otherwise, we're going to take the parent HL, and again, we're going to add 1 to that because we need to consider the fact that we've added the HL for the shipment further up. So we're going to need to map this through. And now we've done that, we can then grab this, better align this up, and go to our output and see what we get. There we go, 2, which references 1, and then we should have 8, which is the other order, which references 1, because it's part of that shipment. Everything there seems to be behaving correctly. So because we've spent quite a bit of time developing this map so that we've got the hierarchy right, we're now able to make this really, really straightforward by just mapping it through and going, if it's an ord, we're going to have this. If it's a pallet, we're going to have this. And that's what we're going to go through and do now. So it just makes it that much easier. Now what we want to do is we want to map the type. So what we're doing here then is we're going to do if the order, I've just got it on the screen on another map, is if it's an ord, then it's O. If it's a compal, then it's P. If it's a con and it's a carton, then it's T. So if I paste this on screen here, you'll be able to see what we're doing is we're going to take the con type, which for an order will be null, blank. And if we do that, it won't map it through. So we have to do a substitute null for anything where it's empty. So it's an empty string. And then we're going to take the type. So for ord, it will just be ord, which will be our ord to O. If it's a pallet, it will be con and pal. And then we can map this through to the appropriate type. I'm just going to move this over here. We move it a bit further down. So then we've got the hierarchical level code here. So now if I go to output, we've got HL being S, which it always has been. Then we've got our order, our pallet. This is for our cartons, our pallet, our carton, our order, our pallet, our carton. So again now, that's working exactly how we want it to work. Then we need to look at line information. So for our cartons, we'll need to store line information. So what we're actually going to need to do here is we're going to need to go further up the top and do a bit of a filter. So if I grab this, move this up here just to get it out of the way, we can bring this back down here. And then I'm going to paste this on screen because what we're going to do is we're going to take a filter and we're going to say if, and again, we're going back to the source for this, if it's a line and if the pallet reference or the container reference, sorry, that we're taking from here matches the container reference for a line, then we want to populate the line here. Okay, so let's do that then. So we're going to go up here. We're going to take the row here. And then we're going to link that through. And again, some of this is a little bit messy and a little bit cumbersome, but it is what it is. And then what we want to do is we're going to go back up here. We're going to see what field on the line is the carton ID. It's field 4. So we're going to take that field 4. I'm going to zoom out as much as I can foreseeably here so I can, it just becomes a bit quicker to drag and map this back down. Again, we've dealt most of it now, so we're all should be good on most of that. So if that references the carton reference or the container reference there, and it equals a lin, so again, we've got to go back up, and we know the first entity is the type. Then we can map that through on here, and then we're going to put our line in. And then we need to start mapping the data that we need for our lines. So for our lines, we're talking about the EANs and the purchase order reference number. So if I come back up here, we've got our lines where we've got the EAN code, we've got eaches and all of that on there as well. And then here we've got the PO line reference number. So again, we've got an order which contains a pallet. That pallet relates to this PO number. We then got a carton, and in that carton we've got items, and those items relate to a particular line on the purchase order. So due to this, then we need to set some fields, static fields here. So because we're dealing with line items, we need to fix the EAN as the ID here. And then we also need to fix for the purchase order. So again, these are just fixed qualifier values. 23503, I believe it's that one. Yep. And then we're going to need to take the EAN ID. So if we go back up here, the EAN is for our lines is field 6. So again, I'm going to zoom out, grab field 6, and then field 6 needs to be under our EAN, so it references to that qualifier. So there we go. So we've got this here. No, I've mapped that under PO. Let's do that correctly to the EAN. Drag that here. And then we also then need to reference the PO reference, which is going to be below here. So again, or the PO line reference, just to be clear on that. So if we go on here, PO line reference is field 3. So we can take field 3. And we can map field 3 in there. So we've got our line information there. So we're now, if we go to output, we've got anything where it's a T, which is our container. We've then got the HL for that, and we're now saying we've got this EAN and it's relating to this purchase order line. So that's the LIN element taken care of. We then need to take care of the item detail, the SN1. So this is going to be dealing with the fact that we've got our EAN side. So we then need to look at and set up our unit of measure and quantity. So we haven't said how many of those items we've got. We've just said we've got this part number and it relates to this PO. So that's what this SN then links to. Now that also links to an LIN because it's all of that information is at the same line. So what's really nice about this is we can just grab that and pinch that there, and then we can start setting up the fields that we need specifically for the SN. So for that, we've got the number of units shipped and the unit of measure. So if we looked at this, we've got the number of units shipped. So if we look at a line here, it's field 7. And 8 is the unit of measure. So we're going to take 7 first of all. Map this down. So number of units shipped. There we go. And then we can go back up and take 8, which was our unit of measure. And then we can map that to the unit of measurement within the SN1 with our quantity. There we go. If we go to our output, we can see here that we've got our line reference and we've got an SM, which gives us our quantity. So that's working exactly how we need it to on that part. Going back to our map, let's see what we need to map next. So we've done the SN1. We now need to look at doing our purchase order reference number. So here, if we go under here, we've got our purchase order reference number, and we need to look at mapping that. So in that instance, we only want to map it based on it being an order, because it's the order where we're going to have the purchase order related to, because we've not got mixed purchase orders. Well, we have, but items on a pallet are only going to relate to a specific purchase order because they're being segregated in that way as part of this scenario. So what we want to do is we want to take the, go on here, we want to take the type, where the type equals order. We can then take the PO reference and map that through to the purchase order reference field within the PRF, which is the purchase order number here. So we can then map this in here. And there we go. We haven't got to do any filtering because, again, we've made this really simple. There is just one extra HL record that's being, well, one extra element or node here, but it's going to be referenced multiple times. So we just need to filter this and populate the data based on the level we're looking at. So now we need to look at the PO4, which is the pack details. So the PO4 in this case is for pallets. So again, we're going to need to look at filtering. So we're going to be filtering in this case so that we only take the fields that are relevant, or the items that are relevant on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste this on screen here. And again, all of these are very similar to what we've done so far. What we're doing is we're going to concatenate the type with the contype. And again, we're substituting null there just to make sure that we're doing the same process so that we don't exclude any records we may or may not be interested in. And then we're going to map through. So what we're doing here is we're saying if it's compound, so if it's a pallet, then we want to create a PO4 for this. And in doing that, we need to then have what's called as a pack size. So that's the number of cartons that are in the pallet. So this will be the child count. Again, going back to why we put this in place originally. And then we also need to map the length, width, and height, and also the base unit of measure for that. So for that, we can just take a fixed value of cm. So we can fix that in here. And then we need to populate the length, width, and height. So we've got length here. And we can map this in reverse as well. So width and height. And again, just to be really clear, we're going to go back up to the file, go here, and you can see for a pallet, we've got the length, width, and height. We actually are only storing the weights at the carton level. So we'll get to that when we need to do that part as well. So if we go to output now, we can see that we've got those PO4s under the Ps for pallets. So that's all coming through as we would expect there, which is good. Next, we need to look at our measures. So again, if we go down here, we've got measures. And it's here where we need to start looking at our cartons. So again, we can literally copy what we've got here. We can map this through, but we're not looking at pallets, we're looking at cartons. So CRT. And again, we can pretty much take the same elements because we are looking at the same elements here. So that maps our measures, and then what we need to start doing is setting some default values for our measures. So I'm going to pop these on here and we'll run through these. So what we're doing here for the carton is we've got PD for physical dimensions, WT for the weight, and then we've got the kg value there as well. So just to say that that is the message we do, the qualifier that we're using. So the measurement reference code ID is here, so it's physical dimensions. We're providing the weight, so this is the qualifier here. And then kg is going to be the unit base of measure, which is here. So we've now got those values. We then need to actually provide the weight value, what that weight actually is. I've shifted that up. Let me just move that around so it's just a bit easier. There we go. So the actual weight value we need to provide in the weight measurement So if we come here, we've got weight. Come down, we've got the measurement value there. So we've now mapped the weight measurements. So if we go to output now, I forgot to map a node. Do that. Output now, we've then got measurements here. So we can see we've got a carton where we've got T for the carton here. Well, we've got the weight, and we've got the weight of the cartons here as well. So it's all mapping through correctly there. Then hit save. And then we continue through the mapping. So again, we then need to do marks and numbers. So let's look at those next. So let's expand this out. Where's our marks and numbers? MAN, there we go. We've got our marks and our numbers. So we're going to expand this out. So let's do that now. There we go. And we've got our marks and our numbers. So what we want to do is for all of the cons, so that's both pallets and cartons, we want the marks and numbers. So we can add a filter, and we're filtering based on the fact that the type is a con, because we want both pallets and cartons. So we can take the type here, and where we're just filtering on the HL there, we can save us stretching all the way up and take that there. So where we're taking that, we then are going to create a marks and numbers. And then we're going to use a qualifier called GM, which in essence means SSCC. So although if we go to our data, we're not using real SSCCs, the idea would be that these pallet references and cartons and bits can be SS or have SSCC reference numbers. So that's the correct qualifier to use in that instance. Then we've got the container reference, which is what we'd want to pass through here. And then we can literally just take that and map that through to our marks and numbers. And then if we go to output, we can see here that if I highlight MAN, which is our marks and numbers, we've got it for pallet, we've got it for carton, pallet, carton, etc. So our marks and numbers are working as intended. Now what we need to do is we need to populate the CTT record. So for the CTT record, that's the total number of HLs. So that's CTT, CTT. Then we can expand this out, and we can look at what we need to do for that. So when we're creating this, we just want to basically populate the number of lines here. Now, that quite simply we can use count for. So if I grab count, we can just populate the result in here. And what we're going to do is we're going to count the HL records. So we've already got our HL structure here. We can just grab this and populate that into the nodes and do a count. However, we've got to be aware that, again, this is all around, this HL we've generated, it's all around what's on the pallets, cartons, etc. It doesn't take into consideration the HL that we've generated, which is the shipment one here. So again, like everything else, we need to addition 1 to it. So if we go down here and paste this in, we can then map this over, correctly pop this here, and then map this through. And we should then get the result of 10 on the end of our CTT. Or CTT. So there we go, we've got 10. And again, even though we haven't created these ending elements here, the IEA will always take the interchange reference that's declared up the top on the ISA. And then again, all of these are related to the elements, etc., as part of the standard X12 format. So we have now got the full mapping of this working. We spent the first session sorting the header out and going through and declaring the first HL and going through that. We then spent this current session creating this whole structure here in order for us to get a view on the parent-child relationship so that we can populate this through and get the full output for our X12 data. So we've got our HL here related to shipment, the one related to the first purchase order, the pallet for that purchase order, pallet 1, and then the various cartons that belong and the contents of those cartons, and then so forth and so forth. Thank you for joining me during this session. Hopefully now you've got a full understanding of the complexity when you're mapping from something like a flat file to something like the X12 format. If you're interested in learning more, check out the other videos on the channel. Equally, if you're interested in grabbing a copy of that mapping that we've just gone through, feel free to reach out on the channel or via LinkedIn and I can provide that to you. Thank you.